This is a Japanese Higonokami. While it was not the first pocket knife ever invented, it is possibly the first one-handed opening pocket knife ever invented, and it's almost certainly the first front flipper pocket knife ever invented. This is a design that has stood the test of time and is still in use the world over. Trivisa has decided to modernize the Higonokami, and we're going to take a look at both the ancient and the modern one today. The ancient Higonokami is a friction folder. It has no locking mechanism. The front flipper doubles as the blade stop. So it stops against the handle, and that's what keeps it from unfolding backwards. The blade is traditionally rendered in Damascus in the finest Japanese tradition of blade making. Multiple layers. This is a raindrop Damascus that is very beautiful. It has only a few parts. The handle is all one piece of bent metal. It has a pivot bar. It has two washers on the outside. Sometimes it doesn't even have any on the inside. This one, I believe, has two very thin ones, and it has a blade. That's all there is to this knife, and it is super elegant in its simplicity. My wife really likes this one because it's so pretty. No locking, just friction to hold it open and closed. Because it's so simple, literally all you have to do is keep the blade oiled. Even if you were to use this for 100 years and the pivot were to loosen, all you would have to do is tap that rivet with a hammer. It's just a standard hammer rivet, and then it would tighten right back up, and you could probably use it for 100 more years. It's traditionally this Wharncliffe style, very pointy blade, which is a great utility blade. It also keeps it inside the nice straight handle. Let's take a look at the modern interpretation of this that Trivisa has come up with. I have bought a couple Trivisa knives here lately. I haven't reviewed any on the channel, but that's coming. They are much better quality than I would expect for the price generally. So let's unbox this one and see if this one is any different. Got all your standard knife stuff in here. Little wiping cloth, lots of stickers, and a nice bag. And then we have the knife. So right away, it looks like they have stuck very close to the traditional size and shape, which is good because this is a pocket knife. It's not meant to be a giant sword or anything like that. So they have modernized a lot here with carbon fiber handles. This is a button lock. It does have a lanyard hole, but they've kept that front flipper / blade stop. And that is a functioning blade stop. Let's take a look at this. Okay, yeah, so that's the stop pin down here, and there's a secondary stop pin up here. So it's a very sturdy design, and that is a functioning blade stop there. I like the jimping on it. You can see the proportions, at least from the side, are very similar. And I love that because this is a very classic knife. You would want it to be recognizable. The traditional one you can see has a clad Damascus, so there's a high carbon steel core and then Damascus on the outsides. This one is a mono steel. I believe this is 10CR steel. I love the way they have profiled the spine on this. So the traditionals typically were very rough. And this one is no exception. It's kind of a sharp spine. Not going to cut you or anything, but you can definitely feel the edges on that spine. This one they have profiled, and that is super classy. I love the look of a good, smooth, profiled spine. I also love the way it feels in my hand. You know, if you've watched this channel very long, I love a good Wharncliffe blade. That one is well executed, and the tip is not too thin. They left a lot of meat in that edge. Full flat grind, as is traditional. This is a lot wider than the traditional examples. So these typically, the Higonokamis, the traditional ones, are not super comfortable on the front of the knife, even though the back of the knife is very comfortable because it's just rounded metal. This one is quite a bit wider to leave room for the liners and the carbon fiber. Button lock action is excellent. This one's on bearings. I love that modernization. It's definitely not traditional, but it makes this knife super flippy and super fun. And you don't need a lot of force on that super long front flipper. There's a lot of leverage there. If you're up here on that front flipper, it just pops out. Kind of have to get your finger out of the way on the back though. So the thickness is, to me, that's kind of a benefit. The handle does feel kind of square because it's not much taller this way than it is this way. There's enough there that it doesn't feel like it wants to rotate in my hand, but it does feel on the square side. Edges on the outside are nicely rounded. I could do with a bit more rounding of these edges on the inside, but that is a super classy pocket knife. And by the way, only about $56. That is a well-priced gentleman's folder with a super classy aesthetic. Let's do a size and weight on these real quick too. These remind me in feel and character a lot of my Benchmade Osborne. They're a little bit smaller, but the blade length, blade cutting surface is very similar. Here they are next to a Kershaw Launch. What is this? Launch 14. Here they are next to a Cold Steel Tough Light. This is the larger Tough Light. And here they are next to the highly standardized Benchmade Bug Out. So they are EDC sized knives. They're just very slender. Weight on these. Let's go historical first. Historical weight is, ooh, that's not right. I gotta fold it. It was rocking too much. 1.57 ounces. Very, very lightweight, even for a knife of that size, which is surprising, again, given due to the metal handles. The modern one we're doing with the lanyard, so that's going to be a little heavier. Bang on 3 ounces for that one, which is still very reasonable for an EDC size knife. Let's do some testing of it. We're going to start with something that I know this is probably going to do badly, which is cutting against a flat surface. So these Wharncliffe style blades typically never do super well on a flat surface because you're just essentially digging in with the tip of the blade. This one does better than expected because if I hold it by the edges, which I can, that edge comes out far enough ahead that I can actually drag that edge along the cutting board and cut the rope. Interestingly enough, the historical example has a little bit more of a rocker to the blade, so I can actually keep my finger underneath the handle like that and get like the last 1.5 inches of blade to rock onto the cutting board. So that actually works a little better in the historical example. Paracord, obviously they're both going to cut well because they're relatively straight Wharncliffe style blades. That's not going to be a surprise, I don't think. Both are flat grinds. That one you saw, I accidentally caught the choil there at the bottom. Interestingly, the historical one doesn't have a choil, so you can put the rope all the way down at the bottom. Let's cut a big, thick nylon rope. Again, I have to be careful where I put that on the modernized one, but that cuts extremely well with the flat grind. It's very slicey, even though it's got a thick spine on the rope. Same thing with the historical one. Again, no surprise there. Let's do our zip tie test. So a zip tie test is getting into the tight space underneath a zip tie, and then I kind of twist and pop the blade up away from the wood. Very, very easy with the modern example. I did have to put a lot of grip into it to keep it from spinning in my hand. That square handle did come into play a little bit there. On the historical one, I actually feel like I can get a little bit better leverage on that because the handle is narrower. although it's very small in my hand and it still wasn't super comfortable. Let's get some edge retention numbers on these things. For edge retention, the historical Higonokami did 325 cuts on that Damascus steel, which is pretty good for Damascus. I will say that as it was getting duller and I started to have to grip the knife harder, to push it harder through my dowels that I use for my edge retention testing, it was less and less comfortable. So as I had to push harder to carve through my bamboo skewers, which I do repeatedly for my edge retention testing, this got a whole lot less comfortable on those sharp edges because I had to put so much pressure there, and I really did not want to be testing it any more than that. The modern one was a bit more comfortable, and it did a bit better. 400 cuts right on the nose. So slightly better edge retention on that steel, which you would expect from a well heat-treated mono steel. It should do a little bit better. As far as which I like better, I'm going to talk about these a little differently than I do my normal knife review. In our American way of doing things, as soon as we come up with a new way of doing something, everybody seems to want to forget about the old way and do it the new way. Japanese culture is very much not that way. In Japanese culture, if you're doing something the old way and it's working well, and people come up with a new way of doing something, lots of people are going to continue to do it the old way, which is very smart in my opinion. Sometimes there's a problem with the new way. Sometimes the old way just looks better. Sometimes there are advantages and disadvantages of both, and the traditional methods of craftsmanship are worth keeping alive. I'm not necessarily going to say that I have a favorite between these two. They're different beasts. The traditional one is more comfortable for light tasks. It is definitely a beautiful knife and it's very slim. The modern one is very fidgety and it's maybe more practical for larger tasks, but it's not as comfortable for small, fine work as the traditional one. So I really like both of these. I'm probably going to keep both of them. I love that Trivisa has done an excellent job of modernizing the Higonokami without making it into something completely different. So thank you very much, and I really appreciate both of these knives.